The AFP is reporting today that there was an attempted arson attack on a mosque in Sweden. Somebody threw a firebomb or a Molotov cocktail at the building, and the police say they also vandalized the property and wrote, quote, vulgar words. They don't give the details on that, but they say, quote, vulgar words. Now, thankfully, nobody was in the building at the time of the attack. The police say, quote, the crime has been classed as attempted arson, vandalism, and incitement of hatred. Now, this attack comes just 3 days after a late-night blaze at a mosque in southern Sweden, which police suspect also was arson. Also, on Christmas Day, 5 people were injured when a petrol bomb was thrown through the window of a mosque in Eskilstuna, which is east of Stockholm. So there were three anti-Muslim attacks just recently. Now, Yahoo News also reports, quote, there have been more than a dozen attacks on mosques in Sweden in the last year. So here's my question. Where's the media on this? Because flip the situation. Let's do a little thought exercise. If there were 3 attacks in a modern nation, in Sweden, carried out by Muslims within the last week, would the media cover it in America, you think? If you say no, you don't know how the American media functions. So if there were more than a dozen attacks in a modern nation by Muslims in the last year, would the media cover it? Again, if you say no, you don't know anything about the American media. It would perfectly fit the narrative of terrorism, terrorism, be afraid. But when you flip the scenario, mum's the word. Nobody says anything. My main issue with America on this specific point and how they cover this is that they're not objective when it comes to terrorism. And even the article on this was very hesitant to call it terrorism. They didn't call it terrorism. But if you're doing anti-Muslim violence, you're likely doing it for a political ideology. We've seen this all throughout Germany. They're doing anti-Muslim protests, and they're doing it because they are neo-fascists. And they say, we don't want your kind. We believe in an anti-immigration rigid ideology, and it's likely the same thing going on here. Remember, terrorism is defined as violence in the name of a political ideology. So if you're doing hate crimes and doing anti-Muslim attacks, that would be the definition of terrorism. But people don't call it terrorism when it's an attack on Muslims, but when it's the reverse, the first thing they do is they call it terrorism. Look, I don't want to flip the script, okay? I just want objective coverage. I just want it so that when there's a terrorist attack done by a Muslim, of course you cover it, and of course you say this is Islamic terrorism. No doubt, absolutely. I'm for objectivity. But at the same time, if there's right-wing terrorist attacks, and a plethora of them, 3 of them in the last week, over 12 of them in the last year, and you don't cover it at all, what does that say about the objectivity of the different media outlets? It tells you they're not objective. It tells you that they have a narrative. If what happened doesn't fit their narrative, then they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to cover it, and they're going to act like it doesn't happen. And by the way, this is the main reason why in America people don't know and they don't understand that right-wing terrorism is actually a bigger problem in America. Because in America, a report released in 2009 by the Department of Homeland Security, it was commissioned under the Bush administration, they found that 56% of the terrorist attacks that were done in the U.S. and attempted in the U.S. from the 1990s until 2009, they were right-wing terrorists. They were anti-government extremists. So we're talking about the KKK, we're talking about neo-Nazis, we're talking about sovereign citizens, we're talking about patriot militias, we're talking about the Phineas movement, which is a new Christian terrorist movement. We're talking about anti-government extremism and Christian extremism. That kind of terrorism is the most prevalent in America, but your average person doesn't feel like that, and they don't know that because the media refuses to cover that kind of terrorism as if it's terrorism. Whenever it's a white guy doing any shooting, it's automatically a shooting and a lone nut. But whenever a Muslim does it, it's automatically terrorism, and it's not a lone crazy one-person thing deal. It's the entire group is guilty. So this is the problem, man. The problem is objectivity is lacking in media because they'll only cover it, the media will only cover it if it's sensationalistic and if it fits their already preconceived narratives that they're trying to fulfill.